The bank said sell or lose it all. The Horseman said she's not selling anything. The letter from the Copper Ridge Savings and Trust arrived on a Monday, and by Tuesday morning, Petra Slade understood that the world she had built since her husband's death was being taken apart by men who had never lifted a fence post in their lives. The letter said that the note on her ranch, 320 acres of Montana grazing land, a house, a barn, and 60 head of cattle, was in default. The balance due was $640. She had until the 1st of October, which was 31 days away, to pay it in full, or the bank would foreclose and sell the property at auction. Petra had known about the note. Her husband, Gareth Slade, had taken it out 2 years before he died, using the ranch as collateral for a loan that was supposed to fund a second barn and a well. Gareth had been a good cattleman but a poor businessman, and the loan had terms that compounded in ways he had not fully understood. He had died in a blizzard 3 winters ago, found half a mile from the barn with his hand still on the lead rope of the cow he had been trying to bring in. The snow had been 3 feet deep, and the temperature had been 20 below, and the search party found him at dawn, frozen, his coat stiff with ice, still holding the rope. The cow survived. Petra had sometimes wondered whether there was a lesson in that, and had decided there was not. Some things just happened, and looking for meaning in them was a luxury she could not afford. Petra had buried him on the ridge above the house, and had been paying on the note ever since, $50 a year, which was all she could manage. The bank said $50 a year was not enough. The bank, under the management of its new president, a man named Harlow Fitch, said the terms required full payment within 5 years, or the note was forfeit. Petra had read the original document. The terms were ambiguous, but ambiguity, in a dispute between a widow and a bank president, favored the bank president. Declan Morrow heard about the foreclosure the way most news traveled in Copper Ridge, through the feed store, where information moved faster than grain. He was 35, a horsebreaker who had been in the valley for 2 years, running a small operation on 20 leased acres, where he trained horses for the ranches in the territory. He was known for 2 things: his hands, which could gentle a horse that no one else could touch, and his silence, which was not shyness, but the settled quiet of a man who had learned that most things worth saying required very few words. He knew Petra Slade by sight and reputation. He had seen her at the feed store and the general store and the church, a woman of 31, with sun-darkened skin and capable hands, and the kind of face that looked like it had been designed to endure weather. She wore her hair pinned back in a way that was practical rather than decorative, and she moved through the town with the unhurried stride of a person who had things to do and intended to do them without detour. She did not gossip at the store counter. She did not linger after church. She bought what she needed, nodded at the people she knew, and went back to the ranch. And the efficiency of her movement through the world was something Declan noticed the way he noticed the gait of a good horse, with appreciation for economy and purpose. He had broken 2 horses for her ranch the previous spring, and she had paid promptly and inspected the horses with the critical eye of someone who knew the difference between a broke horse and a trained one. He had respected that. He had not expected to care about her foreclosure. He had not expected to care about anything in Copper Ridge beyond his horses and his lease. But he heard about it at the feed store, and he heard the men talking about Harlow Fitch, and what he heard made the stones settle in his chest. Fitch wanted the land. That was the talk. The note, the foreclosure, the convenient timing, all of it pointed to a man who was using the bank's authority to acquire property he could not buy at fair price. Fitch had already absorbed 3 small ranches in the valley through similar maneuvers, buying the notes from the original lender and then calling them due under terms the borrowers could not meet. It was legal. It was also the kind of legal that made decent men spit. The Hendricks family had lost their place that way, and the Bowmans, and old Mrs. Callister, who had been on her land since the territory was organized. Each time, Fitch had found a term, a clause, an ambiguity in the paperwork that gave him leverage, and each time, the people on the other side of the desk had been too poor, or too tired, or too intimidated to fight. Fitch was building an empire out of paper and silence, and the valley was letting him, because fighting a bank felt like fighting the weather. Futile, exhausting, and guaranteed to leave you worse off than when you started. Declan rode to the Slade Ranch on a Wednesday evening. He found Petra on the porch, sitting in the chair that had been her husband's, holding the letter from the bank in her hands. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, directly, without pretense, with the particular intensity of a woman who had been managing a crisis alone and had not slept well. "Mr. Morrow," she said, "I heard about the note. Everyone has heard about the note. It is the most popular reading material in the county. I came to ask if you need help." Petra looked at him. The question was simple, but the answer was not, because accepting help meant admitting she could not handle the situation alone, and handling situations alone was the only skill she had practiced for 3 years. "What kind of help?" she asked. "The kind where I look at the note and tell you whether Fitch's terms hold up. My father was a lawyer in St. Louis before he decided he preferred horses. I learned to read contracts before I learned to read a horse." Petra studied his face. It was not the face of a man making a casual offer. It was the face of a man who had already decided what he was going to do and was asking permission as a courtesy rather than a requirement. She had seen that expression on Gareth's face 100 times, the expression of a man whose mind was made up and whose jaw was set and who was going to do the thing regardless of what anyone said. Petra looked at him for a long moment. Then she handed him the letter and the original note, which she kept in a tin box under her bed. Declan sat on the porch and read them in the failing light, and what he read made the stone in his chest grow heavier. "The terms are ambiguous," he said. "Fitch is reading them one way. They can be read another. I know that, but I cannot afford a lawyer to argue the point. You do not need a lawyer. You need someone to stand in the bank and say the words loudly enough that Fitch knows he cannot get away with this quietly. And you are volunteering to be that person." "I am." "Why?" Declan looked at the ranch, the house, the barn, the cattle in the south pasture, the fence line that was tight and mended, and the work of a woman who had given everything to holding it together. He looked at all of it, and then he looked at her. "Because a man who uses a bank to steal a widow's ranch should not be allowed to do it in silence. And because you paid me fairly for 2 horses and did not try to negotiate the price down, which tells me something about who you are." He paused, and something in his voice changed, became less practiced, more uncertain, as though the next words were ones he had not planned to say. "And because I have been in this valley 2 years, and you are the only person I have met who does not talk when there is nothing to say. I respect that more than I can explain." Petra almost smiled. It was the first time her face had attempted anything other than endurance in weeks. "That is an unusual standard for measuring character," she said. "I am an unusual man." He went to the bank the next morning. He went alone, because Petra had cattle to tend, and because Declan believed that certain conversations were better had without the person they concerned present. He walked into Harlow Fitch's office and sat down without being invited, and placed the note on the desk. "The acceleration clause in Section 4 is conditional on default of the annual payment," Declan said. "Mrs. Slade has not defaulted on any annual payment. She has made every one on time for 3 years. Your letter claims the note requires full repayment within 5 years, but the clause reads, balance due upon default, not balance due at 5 years. You are misreading the terms, Mr. Fitch, and I think you know it." Fitch looked at Declan. He was a small man with careful hands, and the particular kind of composure that men develop when they are accustomed to having power and are not accustomed to having it questioned. "You are not her lawyer," Fitch said. "I am her neighbor, and I am telling you that if you proceed with this foreclosure, I will ride to Helena and file a complaint with the Territorial Banking Commission. I will bring the original note and your letter and let them compare the language. I think they will find the comparison interesting. You are threatening a bank." "I am reading a contract. The threat is in the contract, not in me." Fitch's composure held, but underneath it something shifted. He was a man who operated in shadows, and Declan was shining a light, and light was the one thing Fitch's operation could not tolerate. Fitch's fingers tightened on the edge of his desk. His eyes moved from Declan to the note and back, calculating, the way a man calculates when the numbers he has been relying on no longer add up. "I will review the terms," Fitch said. "Review them by Friday. Mrs. Slade has cattle to run and does not have time for your review to take longer than necessary." Declan rode to the Slade ranch that evening and told Petra what had happened. She was in the barn, forking hay, and she listened with the fork in her hands and her face unreadable. "You went to the bank," she said. "I did. Without asking me. I did not want to waste your time if Fitch would not listen." He listened. He reviewed his options and found them narrower than he expected. Petra set the fork against the wall. She looked at Declan in the lamplight, this quiet man who broke horses and read contracts, and had walked into a bank and faced down its president because a woman he barely knew was being cheated. "Why do you care?" she asked, and the question was different this time, not suspicious but searching, as though the answer mattered in a way that went beyond the foreclosure. "Because some things are worth caring about," Declan said. "And some people." Fitch did not foreclose. He withdrew the letter and revised the terms to match the original note's language, which allowed Petra to continue her annual payments until the balance was retired. He did this not out of conscience, but out of calculation. The ride to Helena and the banking commission were threats he could not afford to test. He had other properties to acquire and other notes to manipulate, and a fight with a horsebreaker over contract language was a fight he did not need. Declan stayed. He stayed because the horses he was breaking for the neighboring ranches needed his attention, and because the 20 leased acres were home enough, and because the woman on the ranch next door had looked at him in the lamplight with an expression he could not get out of his head. He began finding reasons to ride past the Slade ranch. He brought her a horse he had trained, a buckskin mare with a smooth gait and a calm temperament, because her own horse was getting old, and she needed a mount she could trust on the range. She accepted the horse with the same directness she accepted everything, without pretense, without excessive gratitude, with the straightforward acknowledgement of a gift that was useful and appreciated. She named the mare Garnet because the coat caught red in the late afternoon light, and the naming felt significant in a way she did not examine too closely. Naming a gift meant keeping it, and keeping it meant accepting the man who gave it. They rode together in the evenings, checking her fence lines, moving cattle, doing the daily work of a ranch that required 4 hands and had only 2. They fell into a rhythm that was as natural as the seasons. Declan arrived at dawn and they worked until the light failed. And the work was the language they spoke most fluently, a language of fence wire and saddle leather, and the particular satisfaction of a job done right by 2 people who understood what right meant. He taught her how to read a horse's temperament from the way it carried its head. She taught him how to read cattle from the way they grazed, which ones were healthy, which were dropping weight, which would need supplemental feed before the first snow. Declan was a natural horseman, quiet in the saddle, easy with the animals, and Petra found herself watching him the way she had once watched Gareth, not with comparison, but with recognition, the recognition of a person who understands the work and does it well. One evening in November, sitting on the porch after a long day of moving cattle to winter pasture, Petra said the thing she had been thinking since the day he walked into the bank. "You saved my ranch. I read a contract. You saved my ranch, Declan, and I want you to know that I see what you did, and I understand why you did it, and I am grateful in ways I do not have words for." "You have words," Declan said. "You are using them right now. Then let me use a few more. I would like you to stay, not as a neighbor, not as a horsebreaker, as something more permanent." Declan looked at her. The porch light caught the side of her face, and she was looking at him with the same directness she brought to everything. No pretense, no decoration, just the plain truth of a woman who had learned that time was short and silence was expensive. "I would like that too," he said. They were married in December by the circuit judge, on the ridge above the house, beside the stone that marked Gareth's grave. Petra said she wanted Gareth to know that the ranch was safe, and that she had found someone who would help her keep it that way. Declan stood in the cold wind and held her hand, and said his vows to the woman and to the land, because in Montana the two were not separate things. The horseman who had read a contract, and the widow who had held a ranch built a life on 320 acres of grassland that Harlow Fitch had tried to steal and could not. The bank survived, and Fitch survived, but the shadow he cast over the valley grew smaller after that, because one man had stood up and said the words, and sometimes that is all it takes.